Last November, I was at one of those high-level climate summits. It was held in a drafty, prestigious hall in Brussels. The air was just thick with the scent of expensive espresso and this heavy rhetoric of moral duty. I sat next to a delegate who spent a solid 20 minutes very passionately explaining why the West needed to embrace austerity and sacrifice growth to save the planet. He spoke about carbon tariffs as if they were some kind of holy crusade, a way to punish the sinners of heavy industry. It was all very noble, very polished, and it felt like a script for a world that just doesn't exist anymore. But then during the coffee break, I noticed this quiet man standing by the window checking spreadsheets on a ruggedized tablet. Turns out he was an operations manager for a Chinese solar giant. So I asked him about the moral sacrifice being discussed inside the hall. He didn't talk about souls or justice. He just pointed at a graph on his tablet showing a 98% yield rate on a new production line in Hefei. "We don't talk about sacrifice," he said with this faint, detached smile. "We talk about output. If the world wants to be green, they have to buy the tools from us. Whether they feel good about it or not isn't in my KPIs."
Oh.
That interaction for me just perfectly captures the seismic shift of 2025. While one side of the world is busy debating the procedural justice of the energy transition, the other side has executed what you could call a dimensional reduction strike through sheer physical manufacturing. To the east, renewable energy isn't a breakthrough of morality. It's the final physical reckoning of industrial power. When China secured 80% of the world's solar production and 70% of its wind turbines, they didn't just win a market. They built a form of civilizational deterrence that makes Western manifestos look like children's drawings. It's a jarring realization. The global energy map is being redrawn by the people who know how to build at scale, not the people who know how to tweet about it. The dichotomy is now absolute. Some are trying to save the planet with PowerPoints, while others are doing it with factories. And as the West realizes it's traded its industrial heart for moral high ground, the question isn't about carbon anymore. It's about who actually owns the future. That is our mission today, and understanding how this industrial might became the new geopolitical force.
That opening anecdote is so vital because it immediately establishes that this deep dive we're about to do, it's not just about a technological upgrade. It's not just about swapping one energy source for another. It's about a fundamental paradigm inversion in how global energy economics even works. We're moving away from a world that was entirely defined by inherent scarcity.
And when we talk about scarcity, we have to remember the rules that governed the last century. We're talking about the dominance of oil, coal, and gas, the world that the economist Harold Hotelling defined almost 100 years ago.
Exactly. The entire old energy world was governed by Hotelling's rule, or the concept of the Hotelling valuation principle. And this rule stated that for finite non-renewable resources, fossil fuels, the price of that resource, net of extraction costs, must, in a perfectly efficient market, rise at the rate of interest.
Okay, so why? Why does it have to rise at the rate of interest?
Because sitting on an oil deposit is fundamentally the same as having money in the bank. If you don't extract it today, its value has to appreciate tomorrow. It has to compensate you for the opportunity cost of not selling it now and investing that money.
So the economic law was built entirely on the premise that oil in the ground is an appreciating asset simply because it's finite. There's only so much of it.
Precisely. This model meant that costs inherently tend to rise over time. As you use up the easy-to-get stuff, it gets harder and more expensive to access the rest. And this governed the entire geopolitical structure, right? It gave immense power to nations lucky enough to possess vast reserves. Think of the volatility of the 70s and 80s price shocks, geopolitical instability. All of it was rooted in the fact that the world energy supply was controlled by geology and cartel decisions.
But renewable energy, especially solar and wind, it just operates completely outside of that entire framework. The paradigm shifts from geology to industry.
Completely. Renewables have dismantled the scarcity model. The primary energy source, sunlight or wind, is free. It's limitless on any human timescale. So the cost of the energy isn't tied to geological extraction or a diminishing finite resource whose price must go up. The cost is purely dependent on the manufacturing technology and the industrial processes used to capture that energy.
So if Hotelling's scarcity rule defined the 20th century, what's the rule that defines the 21st century's energy structure?
It's the reign of the industrial learning curve. You often see it formalized as Wright's law. This law dictates that for every cumulative doubling of production, say, the total number of solar panels ever produced in the world, the unit cost of that product decreases by a predictable, sustained percentage. So instead of costs rising because of scarcity, costs fall because of accumulated experience, engineering optimization, and manufacturing scale. It creates this relentless, perpetual deflationary trajectory for renewable energy components.
And that structural reality, it fundamentally transforms who holds the cards. It means energy wealth is no longer determined by who sits on the deepest oil deposit, but by who can design and build the most efficient, largest factories.
And build them first. That's the crucial part. This dynamic creates a definitive winner-takes-most environment. The player who commits the earliest, invests the most capital in R&D, and achieves the highest manufacturing scale the fastest is rewarded with the lowest production costs. And those lower costs allow them to undersell competitors, capture more market share, and then climb the learning curve even faster. It makes it virtually impossible for new entrants to catch up economically without massive, sustained state intervention.
Right. That's the engine of the dominance we're seeing today. It's a self-reinforcing feedback loop where scale begets cheaper costs and cheaper costs beget even more scale. And the shift, it also means that energy security is fundamentally redefined.
Absolutely. When energy was defined by fossil fuels, energy security meant securing sea lanes, protecting pipelines, ensuring uninterrupted fuel imports. It was a logistical and military challenge focused on moving physical commodities.
Right, moving barrels of oil or cubic meters of gas.
Now, energy security transforms into a reliance on manufacturing equipment imports. It shifts from securing crude oil and LNG to securing solar panels, wind turbines, battery cells, and sophisticated inverters.
Which means domestic production capacity isn't just a nice-to-have anymore. It's a critical national security interest. You can't just go out on the spot market and buy oil when you need it. You need to control the factory that makes the machine that captures the energy.
The national interest is now inextricably linked to robust, resilient supply chains for high-tech manufacturing equipment. If a nation relies entirely on external sources for the physical tools of energy generation, they forfeit a fundamental layer of sovereignty. The security risk isn't a tanker being blocked in a strait, it's a factory shutting down or a single nation controlling the key choke points of production.
And the proof is in the pudding, right? The cost impact. China's industrial scale, driven by this learning curve, has had a profound measurable effect on the entire global energy landscape.
The impact is just undeniable. The relentless efficiency gains they achieve through massive coordinated scale have driven the real-world cost of solar photovoltaic modules down by over 80% in the past decade alone.
80%? That's a staggering number.
It is. And that cost reduction is the single most important factor accelerating the global clean energy transition. It has made solar the most economically affordable electricity generation technology in a majority of regions worldwide. It often undercuts even the subsidized costs of new fossil fuel plants. The scale itself is a force of economic disruption.
And that scale didn't happen by accident. We have to look at the sheer deliberate financial commitment that was required to realize this industrial vision. It just dwarfs what global competitors were doing.
It wasn't just market forces. It was a decade-long sustained commitment of patient state capital.
Since 2011, we have seen China invest more than $50 billion in new photovoltaic supply capacity. That figure is so crucial because it's 10 times the equivalent investment Europe made in the same sector during the same period. That disparity alone is enough to establish an unassailable lead on the learning curve.
And the commitment has only intensified. It's moved beyond that initial establishment phase into just aggressive expansion.
In 2023 alone, over $130 billion was channeled into the solar industry. We have to understand the mechanism behind that flood of capital. This wasn't, venture capital chasing a quick return. This was large, state-backed commercial and development banks providing long-term, low-interest loans, often subsidized land and utility costs, and coordinated policy guidance. This allowed manufacturers to rapidly scale up production lines without the immediate pressure of quarterly returns, driving prices down faster than anyone else could possibly sustain.
That sustained capital flow, combined with the policy coordination, is what allowed them to leverage the learning curve so aggressively. It created an environment where the massive scale required for cost leadership could be reached and sustained.
And the result of all that is this almost total control grid over the entire solar supply chain. We're not talking about dominance in just one area. We're talking about market share exceeding 80% in all major manufacturing stages, from the raw polysilicon, through the slicing of ingots into wafers, the processing of cells, and finally, the assembly of the modules themselves.
And the key to this control, it really lies in the upstream choke points. While a solar module can technically be assembled anywhere, you need the wafers and cells to do it. Critically, China holds nearly 95% of global polysilicon, ingot, and wafer production capacity. These are the highly capital-intensive, technically demanding steps that determine the quality and cost of the final product.
That 95% figure for the key building blocks, polysilicon, ingots, and wafers, that is the definitive metric of control. If you control that, you effectively control the output of every solar panel made worldwide.
And projections suggest that this level of control is structurally locked in through at least 2025, possibly longer. Because building equivalent capacity elsewhere requires years of lead time and overcoming the overwhelming cost disadvantage created by the existing Chinese scale.
This level of control, it fundamentally changes the perception of what an energy resource even is. And it gives a human face to all this abstract data. I was reading about a man named Lao Chen, who manages a crucial silicon wafer production line in Inner Mongolia. For decades, the local economy there revolved around coal black, dirty, and volatile.
Right. And his perspective is vital because it shows the cultural and strategic shift happening on the ground. What was his transformation narrative?
Well, Lao Chen's family security was historically tied to the volatile prices of coal and the exhaustion of local mines. But by 2025, he sees his massive humming factory floor, where robotic arms are precisely slicing silicon ingots into these ultra-thin wafers, as the true engine of power. He told an interviewer that in the old days, power was about who sat on the oil well. But now he feels like he is guarding the new well. Power has shifted completely from geology and fixed deposits to the assembly line, driven by human ingenuity and manufacturing scale. He no longer feels dependent on a diminishing resource. He feels in control of an expanding industrial engine.
That is the essence of the new energy sovereignty. It's a shift from extraction rents to technological rents.
Yeah.
The value is created not by what you dig up, but by the efficiency and scale of what you manufacture.
And this manufacturing prowess isn't siloed in solar. We tend to focus on PV because the dominance there is just so overwhelming, but the policy pushes across all clean technology sectors.
It is a comprehensive industrial strategy. China accounts for over 60% of global manufacturing capacity in both wind turbine technology and battery technologies as well. This scale extends into traditionally high-value strategic industrial sectors like power generation equipment and high-end rail. This industrial ubiquity essentially achieves a near sovereignty across the entire clean energy infrastructure required for the future.
And crucially, they're not resting on their current technological lead. They're actively widening the gap by aggressively moving into the next generation of solar technology.
This is where the scale meets cutting-edge innovation. The current dominant cell technology is what's called P-type, but the future is N-type solar cells. And China is aggressively leading the transition to this superior technology.
Can you elaborate on that a bit? Why are N-type cells such a critical strategic jump? What makes them so much better?
Sure. N-type cells offer several distinct technical advantages that justify this massive strategic investment. Firstly, they achieve significantly higher conversion efficiencies. They simply turn more sunlight into electricity than P-type cells do. Secondly, they exhibit lower light-induced degradation and potential-induced degradation, which is a fancy way of saying they maintain their efficiency for longer over their lifespan. They also typically have better temperature coefficients, meaning their performance doesn't drop as sharply in hot climates. In essence, they are higher yield, more robust, and longer-lasting panels.
So, by securing dominance in N-type production, they're ensuring that even if competitors manage to build P-type factories today, they will quickly find themselves using last-generation, lower-efficiency technology.
Exactly. And the scale they are pursuing is just staggering. China has announced plans to build more than 1,000 gigawatts of this N-type cell capacity. To put that number into perspective, that is 17 times more capacity than the rest of the world combined. This ensures the learning curve for the next generation of solar technology remains steepest for them, accelerating that winner-takes-most dynamic into the foreseeable future and locking in cost leadership for years to come.
So if that industrial foundation is the bedrock, we really need to understand the strategic edifice that's being built on top of it. This isn't just a green initiative. It's about positioning for the 21st century geopolitical structure.
Absolutely. We have to analyze how this industrial scale directly supports China's strategic goals, which move far beyond simple environmental compliance or decarbonization. And the core divergence lies in the philosophical approach to the energy transition itself.
Right. We started by mentioning the Western framework, which often focuses on moral austerity, sacrifice, degrowth, and using carbon taxes as a punitive measure against heavy industry. It's a narrative that's really focused on limitation.
The Eastern paradigm, centered on what is termed ecological civilization, operates on a completely different principle. It's not about limitation at all. It's about pursuing energy sovereignty through abundance. It reframes environmental action as a national strength multiplier.
So instead of securing less energy at a higher moral cost, the goal is to secure more energy at a lower industrial cost.
Precisely. Ecological civilization mandates securing massive amounts of abundant, cheaper, and cleaner energy. And this energy is not intended to curb development. It's intended to fuel advanced infrastructure, higher densities of automation, and, crucially, greater computational power. Environmentalism is strategically redefined as the efficient, large-scale pursuit of energy abundance to sustain technological and industrial ascendancy.
And that immediately connects to what is arguably the foundational geopolitical competition of our time: computational power.
The bedrock of the 21st century geopolitical order is computational national power. This encompasses AI development, big data processing, and advanced industrial automation. All of this requires vast, cheap, and stable energy. If your ambitions for digital transformation are limited by the high cost of electrons, your computational power will be fundamentally constrained.
The scale required for training modern AI models, especially large language models, is just immense. Without ultra-low-cost electrons, running those compute cycles at the frequency you need becomes economically restrictive for any nation.
Exactly. Computational cost is the ultimate barrier to entry in the AI race. By controlling the means of energy production and achieving the world's lowest marginal cost of electricity, they are strategically undercutting the digital transformation ambitions of their competitors. The energy transition becomes an intrinsic, necessary component of the digital race.
We can see this playing out in the real world through the development of these green computing hubs. I was fascinated by the story of Mailing, a data engineer working deep in Gansu province. Her daily routine perfectly illustrates how this energy abundance translates into a real competitive advantage.
The Gansu region is a fascinating case study because it harnesses the massive solar and wind resources of the arid interior, connecting them directly to data centers.
Right. Mailing works in a high-tech facility that's just surrounded by endless arrays of wind turbines and solar mirrors. Because the renewable energy production is so vast, and thanks to the scale of manufacturing, the panels and turbines themselves were so cheap to acquire, the marginal cost of electricity for her data center is near zero at peak times. So for her, the green transition isn't some moral sacrifice, it's a brutal competitive advantage.
And how does that cheap energy change the way she works?
She runs large-scale AI models 247, crunching massive, complex data sets for areas like advanced biotech and autonomous driving systems. She notes that if she were running these same models in a major city on the eastern seaboard, the electricity costs would either prohibit the training runs or force them to run intermittently. But in Gansu, the energy is so abundant and cheap that she can iterate and test faster. In her mind, the desert isn't a wasteland. It's a giant, decentralized battery powering the computational brain of the future. She explicitly sees the green infrastructure as the fuel for winning the AI race.
That story really crystallizes the strategic goal. If you have the world's most cost-effective energy supply, you naturally gain a structural lead in the AI race, where computing cycles are the key, limiting, and expensive factor. And this isn't being left to chance. The national strategy is formalizing this integration.
That brings us to the National AI Energy Integration Plan, which was launched by the NDRC, the National Development and Reform Commission, and the NEA, the National Energy Administration. This is a top-down strategy to fuse these two complexes.
And the target is ambitious and specific. Establish a robust, integrated AI energy innovation system by 2027. This isn't just about applying AI to one power plant. It's a systemic, end-to-end optimization effort.
And the focus is on widespread AI application across all the core energy technologies. They are targeting power grids, of course, but also conventional generation, thermal, nuclear, and hydro, as well as the legacy sectors of coal, oil, and gas. It's about making everything operate smarter and more efficiently, maximizing the value of every single electron that's generated.
This systemic optimization relies on new infrastructure designed for data collection and processing. The plan explicitly mandates creating high-quality, standardized energy data sets. This means deploying sensors all across the grid and generation facilities to feed massive amounts of real-time data into sophisticated models.
And those models require computing power, which is why there's this parallel push to build out the computational infrastructure.
Exactly. They are enhancing computing power specifically for energy optimization and developing large-scale algorithmic models designed to optimize the entire energy supply chain, from predicting weather patterns for renewable output, to dynamic load balancing on the grid, to predictive maintenance for equipment. The goal is to minimize waste and ensure stability, marrying sustainability goals with accelerating efficiency.
And this industrial and digital focus is also heavily concentrated in major urban centers that act as accelerators. Shanghai, for instance, has a very clear plan to integrate AI deeply into its manufacturing base.
Shanghai's plan is a comprehensive implementation effort that aligns perfectly with the national strategy for new industrialization. It aims to fundamentally shift the quality and complexity of manufacturing, moving towards truly intelligent systems.
What are the key numerical targets Shanghai is aiming for over the next few years?
Over the next 3 years, the goal is aggressive, enabling 3,000 enterprises to adopt core AI technologies within their processes and building approximately 10 AI-enabled manufacturing demonstration factories that serve as models for the rest of the country.
And that focus on AI-enabled demonstration factories suggests they are prioritizing high-value, complex sectors.
Absolutely. Shanghai's initiative targets key industries where manufacturing prowess translates directly into global competitiveness. Integrated circuits, advanced electronics, automotive components, high-end equipment, aerospace, and pharmaceuticals. They are looking for productivity gains in complex, high-margin goods, not just raw output.
And the structural support for this must be immense. You need more than just factories. You need shared digital infrastructure.
They are prioritizing the construction of an intelligent computing cloud platform, specifically for manufacturing services like model training and deployment. Furthermore, they're developing an industrial corpus public service platform for collecting and sharing high-quality, industry-specific data. This shared digital infrastructure reduces the entry barrier for individual enterprises to adopt sophisticated AI tools, massively reinforcing the core industrial base by making manufacturing smarter and vastly more competitive globally.
So, the shift to clean energy isn't seen as a burden at all. It's a foundational competitive move designed to provide the lowest cost, most resilient energy supply necessary for the next digital and industrial revolution. Now, this brings us to the divergence in policy responses. The speed and scale of this build-out contrasts so sharply with the policy and regulatory landscapes in the West.
The contrast between building speed and regulatory slowness is the defining characteristic of geopolitical friction in the energy transition today. It's a clash of systems.
We see this policy action dichotomy so clearly in the U.S. Consider the fate of the Esmeralda 7 solar project in Nevada. This project was a massive plan to deliver 6.2 gigawatts of clean power, enough for millions of homes, but federal officials formally canceled its environmental review.
And that cancellation represented a massive loss of potential clean capacity. It highlights the friction inherent in complex, multi-stakeholder policy environments, particularly when projects involve federal land, endangered species acts, cultural heritage reviews, and interagency conflict. The complexity of approval creates costs, delays, and often outright cancellation.
Now contrast that regulatory struggle with the construction timeline of a single complex on the Tibetan Plateau.
That project represents the power of centralized, coordinated planning. It spans over 160 square miles and generates a staggering 20 gigawatts of electricity. That capacity is enough to power approximately 7 million homes. And that build-out was achieved rapidly through streamlined governmental approvals and coordinated development of the necessary high-voltage transmission lines to bring that power to population centers.
That difference, 6.2 gigawatts stalled versus 20 gigawatts built, it isn't just a matter of local bureaucracy. It speaks to a fundamental structural capability to mobilize resources for large-scale energy projects swiftly and decisively.
And that difference in scale and speed creates what we call the physical barrier. The sheer physical output of green energy components in 2025 has become so overwhelming that it serves as a definitive, unassailable civilizational barrier. Reactive policies like carbon tariffs, while politically satisfying, struggle to make a real-world dent.
Because even if a Western government implements a tariff intending to make imports more expensive and promote domestic manufacturing, the domestic manufacturers still cannot overcome the fundamental cost gap.
The structural deficit is just too vast. A solar module made in China is still approximately 50% cheaper than one produced in Europe and 65% cheaper than one produced in the U.S. This persistent cost gap remains despite strong domestic policies like the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and India's Production-Linked Incentive, or PLI.
These policies are allocating billions in subsidies to build domestic capacity, yet the price difference remains insurmountable for many developers. Why is that?
Because the subsidies largely focus on the downstream stages, the assembly of the final module. Overseas markets remain completely dependent on China for the upstream choke points: high-purity polysilicon, wafers, and cells. If you cannot produce the core components at competitive prices, assembling them domestically still leaves the final product significantly more expensive than the vertically integrated, hyper-efficient Chinese supply chain. Closing a 65% cost gap requires far more than just module assembly subsidies. It requires replicating the entire upstream high-capital ecosystem, which is a massive, massive undertaking.
This realization of futility is hitting logistics managers on the ground. I remember reading the account of a man named Marcus, the logistics manager at the port of Rotterdam, which is Europe's gateway for global trade.
Right, and he was trying to implement new Western carbon border tariffs, if I remember correctly. His daily reality starkly contrasts with the policy rhetoric coming out of Brussels.
Exactly. Marcus describes standing on a pier filled high with stacks of East Asian-made batteries, solar panels, and inverters. He noted this prevailing sense of futility among the workers and even the customs agents. He saw firsthand that the local European manufacturers couldn't compete, not just on price, but often on the technical specifications and speed of delivery, regardless of the subsidies.
So what did that experience teach him about policy versus production?
His key takeaway was that the abstract, policy-based climate narrative of the West was being drowned out by physical reality. He realized that policy is simply a ghost compared to the solid, relentless reality of a supply chain that never sleeps. He concluded that you cannot regulate your way out of a manufacturing deficit of this magnitude when the other side has already built the infrastructure for the next century. The tariffs only make the necessary energy tools more expensive for the people who actually need them.
And that stark physical dominance is further fortified by control over the essential inputs. It's not just the factory floor, it's the mineral leverage that underpins the entire transition.
Right. No digital or clean energy transition is possible without critical raw materials, particularly the elements that are collectively known as rare earths.
These minerals are essential because they're highly functional and demanding applications. For instance, neodymium and praseodymium are crucial components in the high-performance permanent magnets used in EV motors and large-scale direct-drive wind turbines. Lithium, nickel, and cobalt are non-negotiable for high-density batteries.
And China has secured a multi-layered position of control over these materials.
It starts with reserves. China holds between 40 and 50% of global rare earth reserves. But the true leverage isn't what's in the dirt. It's in the processing and refining capacity. They process almost 70% of global rare earth production and, crucially, maintain a near monopoly in the critical refinery industry, controlling around 90% of global separation and purification activity.
Why is the refinery phase the key choke point?
Because extracting rare earths is one thing, but separating them into the individual elements at the high purity required for technological application is a complex, chemically intensive process. It requires specialized infrastructure, skilled labor, and significant environmental management. The rest of the world has allowed its refining capacity to atrophy because it simply couldn't compete with the scale and integration established there.
So that near monopoly grants them incredible influence over the entire global production chain for high-tech goods.
It grants them leverage over the global production of EVs, solar panels, wind components, and advanced electronic devices. This capability allows them to influence the price and delivery pace of these materials, and that leverage can be deployed in international trade negotiations. Global efforts like developing domestic production in the US or expanded recycling in Europe will take many years, likely a decade or more, before they can substitute Chinese production at the required quantity and quality to eliminate that dependency.
So, if the factory floor is the new well, and critical minerals are the gatekeepers to that factory floor, the strategic position has been solidified at both ends of the supply chain. We now need to look at the broader, long-term strategies being employed to fortify this position for sustained ascendancy.
The broader strategy is comprehensive. It involves fortifying their economy through innovation, addressing domestic rebalancing, and strengthening the global reach of the renminbi. The first pillar is innovation capacity, moving from a reliance on manufacturing volume to technological excellence.
And the data shows a clear upward trend in innovation output.
Absolutely. China's innovation capacity has made consistent government-guided gains. According to the WIPO's Global Innovation Index, it entered the global top 10 in 2025. That's a massive jump from being ranked 29th just a decade earlier in 2015. This reflects sustained investment translating to measurable R&D output.
And their focus is heavily skewed toward the technologies that underpin the current industrial strategy we've been talking about.
That's demonstrated by the sector-specific focus. The country leads globally in AI patent grants, accounting for an impressive 70% of the global total. This indicates a massive dedication of resources to the foundational technology required for that AI compute imperative. Furthermore, it hosts 24 of the world's top 100 innovation clusters, prioritizing technological self-reliance, particularly in high-risk, high-reward areas like advanced semiconductors and strategic equipment, as evidenced by the large-scale capitalization of the National Integrated Circuit Fund.
But the domestic economy faces structural headwinds. We know about long-term demographic challenges and persistent weak consumer confidence. How does this industrial strategy tie into rebalancing the domestic economy?
The leadership recognizes that high household saving rates and weak consumption are structural inhibitors to sustained quality growth. The policy focus is shifting towards boosting productivity and ensuring that the gains from industrial and technological dominance translate into higher living standards domestically.
And they are using AI not just for manufacturing, but as a mechanism for managing labor displacement and strengthening the service economy. How does AI help with job management? That seems like a contradiction.
It is a deliberate two-pronged strategy. The rise of automation driven by AI and intelligent manufacturing will displace workers in traditional factory settings. To manage this transition, the government has mandated massively expanded AI education and retraining programs across educational institutions. The goal is to equip 25 million students annually with high-tech skills in fields like robotics, biotech, and data science.
And where are these newly skilled workers supposed to go?
This newly skilled talent is channeled into emerging service industries. The ultimate goal is to maximize employment gains and stabilize household income by directing talent into services that are currently underdeveloped compared to major Western economies. Things like elder care, high-quality healthcare, childcare, and hospitality.
That makes sense. As the population ages, demand for those services will skyrocket, and the increased productivity dividend in manufacturing creates the wealth necessary to afford them.
Exactly. Expanding the high-value personal services sector is designed to absorb displaced workers from traditional manufacturing and the contracting real estate sector. It provides stable, higher-income jobs that directly support sustained domestic consumption. It's a strategy to manage technological unemployment proactively.
And there's that fascinating concept of the productivity dividend, linking efficiency gains to the potential for higher living standards and reduced working hours.
That is the ambitious long-term contemplation of the leadership. Average annual working hours there are around 40% higher than the average of other major economies. The hypothesis is that if sustained large-scale productivity gains driven by AI and industrial optimization allow those high working hours to converge towards the major economy average, it could unlock a substantial domestic dividend.
And what are the potential numbers associated with that shift?
Our sources suggest that if that convergence occurs, sustained productivity gains could unlock an additional 4.8 percentage points of GDP in potential private consumption. This provides a clear, actionable path for households to consume more and live better, addressing the long-term challenge of stimulating domestic demand by demonstrating a clear pathway from industrial efficiency to household prosperity.
So beyond domestic rebalancing, the second major strategic pillar is leveraging this industrial dominance to achieve external goals, specifically through the internationalization of the renminbi.
The strategic use of green finance is a key mechanism for this. By capitalizing on its role as the largest clean tech manufacturer globally and one of the largest green bond issuers, they are effectively using their technological and cost advantages as a form of climate capital diplomacy.
And how does that financial diplomacy work on the ground?
Through the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, RMB-denominated climate finance, specifically sustainability bonds and green credit lines, are being used to fund clean tech projects globally. For instance, funding solar farms in Central Asia or EV battery manufacturing facilities in Hungary is done using RMB. This exports their technological and cost advantages to developing economies in South Asia and East Africa, and simultaneously increases the global utility of the renminbi.
So the economic benefit for those developing nations, getting cheaper, state-of-the-art clean energy infrastructure, is directly tied to increasing the usage of the RMB for trade settlement.
That is the critical link. RMB settlement is growing, fundamentally leveraging China's position as the largest raw material importer and the dominant force in battery and EV supply chains. Their control over 75% of global lithium-ion battery production, 70% of cathode capacity, and 85% of anode production grants them immense leverage.
That leverage creates a natural environment for using the renminbi in these transactions.
It does. This choke point position in strategic global supply chains creates a natural environment for RMB pricing in these critical sectors. Chinese exporters reduce currency risk, and global buyers who need these components gain guaranteed access to supply and increasingly favorable RMB financing options.
And finally, as a strategic complement to this financial internationalization, we've seen a deliberate effort to accumulate gold reserves. What is the purpose of that accumulation in this context?
The aggressive gold accumulation since 2023 serves as a vital strategic complement to RMB internationalization. It's an unorthodox approach to becoming a potential reserve currency provider. By building confidence in the currency's stability through the possession of tangible assets like gold, they are pursuing what some describe as a hard asset credibility model.
They're essentially using gold accumulation to align their monetary weight with their share of global GDP without having to undertake the massive, potentially destabilizing step of full capital account convertibility.
Precisely. The gold accumulation acts as a signal of long-term stability and resilience, anchoring confidence in the RMB through a tangible, globally recognized store of value. It is a necessary fortification strategy against global financial volatility, ensuring their industrial and technological dominance is supported by increasing monetary influence.
It truly is a holistic strategy. It starts with dominating the physical production of goods, uses that physical dominance to secure ultra-cheap power for the digital economy, and then leverages the resulting financial power to fundamentally re-engineer the global economic architecture. Okay, let's unpack this. The world is undergoing a civilizational shift, moving decisively away from the luck of geological resource endowment, where power was dictated by who sat on the oil, to the intentional engineering of industrial scale, where power is now determined by factory yield rates, sustained capital deployment, and cumulative production climbing that industrial learning curve.
And this shift fundamentally inverts traditional energy economics. It transforms energy from a finite commodity whose price must rise into a manufactured product whose price perpetually falls due to scale and efficiency. This manufacturing capability is the definitive new hard power.
And this is where the long-term implications become most significant. The competition to decarbonize is not just a moral quest to reduce carbon. It's a fierce structural race to secure the ultra-low-cost, abundant energy required to power the AI and high-tech computational infrastructure of the 21st century. The green transition is the economic foundation for future computational national power.
And that computational advantage, powered by electricity generated by equipment manufactured at overwhelming scale, enables a strategic pivot toward abundance and technological ascendancy, contrasting sharply with moralistic calls for sacrifice or austerity.
So what does this all mean? The map of global energy and industrial power has been definitively redrawn. It's founded not on policy debates or geopolitical rhetoric, but upon the sheer physical reality of factory output, technological control over critical supply chains, and the strategic integration of energy production with the digital future. The factory floor has become the ultimate strategic choke point.